Hello and welcome to the Manchester is Red podcast. My name is Steven Railston. I'm back to host this episode, and I'm joined, as usual, by Samuel Luckhurst. Samuel, a quick I want today probably, because not much has happened, and that's the whole point of this podcast, I guess. We discussed earlier in the week there was a decision to be made on Erik Ten Hag. There was a meeting in London on Tuesday involving Sir Jim Ratcliffe and Ineos's top brass, and Ten Hag survives. He is still here. What is the latest?
We think he's survived. The indication is that he is. I mean, he is still the manager, and the game against Brentford is 8 days away now. The pre-match press conference, we assume, will be next Thursday. So that's less than a week away. Logically, if there is going to be a change of manager during an international break, it would happen in the first week, and the week has still got the weekend to go. But I think realistically now, it would be a slight surprise, or certainly the question would be if they were to change managers this week, it would be, well, why have you waited until Friday, Saturday, or Sunday? But as I've said before, there is a precedent with it happening with Pochettino at Tottenham. He was sacked and Jose Mourinho was appointed. I think it was 4 days before their first game back after the November internationals at West Ham. So it has happened before. But it's been a peculiar week in that there have been these two high-profile meetings that had reporters, photographers, all sorts of people waiting outside, and everybody has been asking the question that's on the lips of millions of United fans as well. And we've not got an answer. Nobody has said outright he's staying. I think they're loath to even address that question because it's a repeat of a question that was asked 4 months ago in the wake of the FA Cup final. It's pretty embarrassing for United that question is still being asked and that it's resurfaced again. And there is a bit of, there's an element of heads being stuck in the sand over it and not really wanting to address the issue directly or specifically. And so, the working assumption is that Ten Hag is safe. I mean, a colleague wrote on, I think it might have been Tuesday night, Wednesday morning, that he survives, and in the copy it said seemingly safe. I thought that's quite a risk there because it's still there's not been an official communique or any background or any guidance at all. But I think in retrospect now it was a safe assumption because United have just decided to ignore the question. They've said repeatedly that this executive meeting was pre-scheduled. That they can't control who's going to be outside looking to doorstep one of the power brokers. It was routine. It was described as, but as everyone knows, it was anything but routine. It wasn't exactly business as usual. It might have been from the inside, but from the outside, given recent results and the scrutiny on the manager, and also the fact that United are assessing potential replacements for Ten Hag. Really, it would have been a lot easier for them to have nipped it in the bud, moved the news cycle on to something else, and it has moved on. In fairness, with England's result on Thursday night, as far as the UK press is concerned, anyway. But we all know that at Carrington next Thursday, if indeed it is Ten Hag who's in the Jimmy Murphy Centre, which we believe it is at the time of speaking, then there are going to be questions about his future again. But there's still not an outright confirmation. I suspect the confirmation will come when Ten Hag is spotted out in hail or spotted driving into Carrington early next week.
It's like a cat with 9 lives at this point. That's what it feels like. He just keeps on surviving when I don't
Erik,
think
10 lives.
Possibly.
Possibly.
Itself, didn't it? How did I not come
It
up
does,
with
yeah.
that?
I know. That wasn't mine, in fairness. I think the first one who came up with that, I think it was Laurie Whitwell, in fairness. So I've got to give Laurie the kudos and the credit for that.
Chapeau to Laurie.
Yeah.
Look, it's been a mess, hasn't it, Samuel, if we're being honest. United are right in the sense that they can't control the media interest and who's outside the office with the cameras. But the reason why journalists are going down to Knightsbridge in London to record Sir Jim Ratcliffe arriving at that meeting is because there's such huge interest in the story. It's a massive story. When the manager of Manchester United is under such pressure and they've had the worst start to the Premier League season ever, 14th in the league, it's just been absolutely dismal again. It was a story in May, it was a story last season, it is a story again. The way they've handled it, hasn't been ideal. And we discussed this in the last podcast. You want to give new owners the benefit of the doubt, and they've done a lot of good things, obviously including accelerating plans for Old Trafford. But on the flip side, there's been the job cuts. 250 people have been made redundant. And when the team is successful on the football pitch, that can be ignored, and that will be a moot point, really. But at the moment, United aren't successful on the pitch. They're 14th in the league, and Ten Hag's under enormous pressure. And Ineos they're making a mess of this, aren't they? If we're honest.
I think so. I think that Ratcliffe has talked a very good game since he came in, but United have seldom played a good game. That's a problem. It's a problem for him that the same question is being asked 4 and a bit months on from the FA Cup final, and it is affecting him in a very small but quite telling way. In that, after the FA Cup final, he walked through the mix zone in order for dignitaries to get to the tunnel or the dressing room area at Wembley. You have to walk through the mix zone, and he strolled through with Dave Brailsford. A reporter towards the end of it just asked him outright about Ten Hag. Is he staying? Ratcliffe looked slightly startled by that and was. I think Brailsford even kind of ushered him away. There's almost a bit of a Mr. Burns Smithers vibe going on there, and then I think it was in the tunnel cam footage from the FA. They appeared to capture Ratcliffe asking an Ineos employee if there was another way out. And he definitely took another way out, because the Ineos employee followed United's departing party back out the mix zone. We didn't see Ratcliffe again. And I was in that mix zone until the bitter end that day. Johnny Emmons was the last United member, I think, to leave, and he stopped to speak to us right at the end of it. And then, of course, on Monday, Ratcliffe entered Old Trafford via the front door. Inevitably, he was filmed arriving, because it's a Monday that there were going to be fans milling around, going into the Meg store, tourists going on the museum and tour, or what have you. And of course, he's spotted. That alerts photographers. Photographers turn up. And unlike Omar Barada, Sir Alex Ferguson, and Gary Neville, who attended that meeting and left through the front door, Ratcliffe took the back door, and away from the prying eyes of the public, away from supporters. So when you're dodging the camera lenses, you're dodging reporters, because they want to ask you the question that was asked of him in May. It's not a good look, and this was all very avoidable, as we've said before, if they had just changed manager. And the pickle they're in now is that you look at the kind of profile of manager that you surmise that Ineos would want. It doesn't really fit in with United at where they're at the moment, because they need immediate results. They need to progress pretty quickly. They need to get back into the Champions League next season. The whole patient approach, it's almost having to go out of the window, because the squad has been assembled at great expense. That squad already looks in a bit of a state. I thought United had a decent transfer window. I think it was maybe overrated in some quarters. That was just subjective opinion. I didn't think they should be. I didn't think they should have signed a single Dutch player or Dutch-born player or Eredivisie alumni in the summer, just because I think they needed a clean break from what was going on the previous summers under Ten Hag. It turned out they were happy to have a more Dutch-centric transfer window than the previous summer transfer windows, which was clearly a mistake, and it's already proved to be a mistake, even though Mazraoui, I think, has been reasonably solid. But De Ligt and Xerxes, there were some real issues there with those two players at either end of the pitch. And we could talk all day long about the mistakes that have gone on this calendar year, or just in the past 4 months, and that pre-season optimism, that cautious pre-season optimism, where they didn't necessarily get the results in those games, but they played well in phases, and there were good things to take from them. That feels quite distant now, and there are these portentous dark clouds hovering above United once again.
It's frustrating to be talking about it once again, and like I said, we said that earlier in the week. It's just Groundhog Day. We're talking about the same issues over and over again, and it shouldn't have happened at the end of the day. Ratcliffe should have nipped it in the bud in the summer, made the mistake, and I mean, he's not a stupid man. He's made more money than we could even think about, and this decision is, in my opinion, out of stubbornness and not wanting to look so stupid in making the initial decision in the summer. And I think they just, and as I said last time, they just have to take ownership of it, move on, draw a line in the sand and move on. And that's not happening, seemingly. And as you've said, we'll not know until Ten Hag turns up in the Jimmy Murphy building on Thursday to speak to reporters. When you look at the game, Samuel, when the international break finishes and football resumes, it's fascinating. I mean, you've got Brentford at home at Old Trafford. That's a 3 p.m. kickoff. United should be winning that game, and there's going to be enormous pressure around that now.
I think that's a bit unfair on Brentford. I mean,
come on,
almost
Brentford
every game looks treacherous.
Side. They're an established Premier League side. They always give United something to think about. But United at home to Brentford, they should be beating Brentford. You're smiling,
maybe in 1974, 75, whenever it was they last played them before.
I'll make that point. It sounds disrespectful. I'll double down. They should be beating Brentford at home. Like, the standards have slipped so far if they're not. You've got Fenerbahce after that, West Ham, Leicester in the Cup, Chelsea at home, Panathinaikos, and then Leicester at home. And then you've got
PAOK,
November.
isn't it? It's not Panathinaikos.
Ah, sorry,
PAOK,
in the Europa League. So, right, so you've got those games before the international break, the November international break. The question now is, does he survive until the November international break? And that will be the whole narrative when football resumes. It's just not right. It just can't happen. I think you just got to nip it in the bud and get rid of him.
I completely agree with you. And also, this notion that last week he had 2 games to save his job was nonsense. United would have formed an opinion long before then. And I don't think those 2 games would have had that significant a bearing on what they're going to do, whether they do something this month or next month or this calendar year. It remains to be seen. But you look at those 2 results last week, and on the face of it, they look reasonably respectable. 2 draws away from home at a good side, certainly in Villa, and a decent side in Porto, one of their toughest Europa League games. But the manner of those performances is troubling, going from 2-0 up to 3-2 down, requiring an added time goal to get a point in Porto, and that game generally being a homage to Copenhagen away or Galatasaray away last season. That is a huge issue, because it clearly indicates that United have not remotely progressed over the last 12 months. The Villa game was a turgid game, unwatchable. It will only be remembered for Johnny Evans's performance. And yes, Villa are a good side. They finished 4th in the Premier League table last season, and it was one of the few games this season where United didn't actually create many chances. But it was still a performance where you're looking at United and you're thinking, okay, they're battling, but there's not much enterprise there. There's no real belief there. It's not a performance for the long term. And also, there was no correlation between those 2 performances. They were 2 extremely different performances. They were so different that the centre-backs changed completely from one game to the other. And when you're doing that, it's not rotation, which is becoming the most overused word that Ten Hag is using at the moment. He dropped De Ligt and Martinez, and they deserve to be dropped as well, because their form had been really poor. And Evans and Maguire did a very good job, in Maguire's case for a half, of nullifying Watkins. In Evans' case, it was one of his best performances back at United, but he has got form for reserving his best form against the best teams. Liverpool away last season springs to mind, and City away as well. United went to pot after Evans went off, and it was Willy Camboire who came on, and City ended up scoring a couple of late goals and win that game. But when you're turning to 2, essentially you're third and fourth choice centre backs, or 4th and 5th choice centre backs, to come in for a game that was extremely important, so important that Ratcliffe rocked up with the rest of the Ineos power brokers. It's not one of those games that, if you look at the games Ratcliffe has attended, they've either been showpiece matches at Wembley or games against the old Big Six. And I know Villa finished in the top 4 last year, but it's not a glamour fixture, Aston Villa, Manchester United. But because of the importance and the timing, his presence there did feel slightly more significant than when he was at the Liverpool game last month, or when he was at the Arsenal game in May, because he was hobnobbing with Sir Keir Starmer ahead of him winning the election, clearly because there are a lot of meetings and discussions going on about what United's going to do with the stadium and plans to regenerate Trafford Wharfside. But I can't even remember what the original question was, but in terms of these bankers games coming up, I know there's so much to talk about. We forget about the games, but Brentford have given United a real run for their money in the majority of their fixtures since they got promoted. I think apart from one game, which was United's final home game of the season, final home game under Ralph Rangnick, where Brentford was safe and there was not much to play for, and United won 3-0. Apart from that one, they've all been tight games. Sorry, they've not all been tight games. Brentford, of course, thrashed United 4-0. They thrashed them 1-1 last season. Brentford were 1-0 up going into added time at Old Trafford just over a year ago, and then it was the McTominay rescue act. I think a couple of seasons ago, it was a tight 1-0 win at Old Trafford. They're not a pushover by any stretch, and they've had a pretty reasonable start to the season. And unlike United, they have an identity. They've got a manager there who is synonymous with longevity. You know what you're going to get from them. I would be amazed if United won that match comfortably next week. And then, as you say, Fenerbahce going to Istanbul, that is always a big test of a Manchester United side. And then it's quite a tight turnaround going to West Ham for a 2 p.m. kickoff on a Sunday. And West Ham beat United last season at home without actually playing well a couple of days before Christmas. West Ham were better when they lost 3-0 at United a couple of months later at Old Trafford. So I don't think this notion of he's got X number of games to save his job is correct. I imagine United have made their decision on what they're going to do with the manager, but it's about getting plans in place and settling on what they're going to do once they pull the trigger. Are they going to go down a caretaker route? Are they going to get someone who's going to go in straight away? That when Rodgers was sacked by Liverpool 9 years ago, it was interesting that it was hours after his final game in charge at Goodison Park, which was a 1-1 draw, I think. Now, that tells you that even if Liverpool had gone to Goodison and thrashed Everton 5-0, Rodgers was still going. And I think that's the way United should operate with Ten Hag. It doesn't matter what happens in the upcoming games results-wise. It shouldn't have mattered what happened last week. I think if United won 3-0 against Villa and Porto, I would still have been of the opinion that they should change manager. And you can't be that capricious when it comes to the manager's position, because the body of evidence is so over. There's so much to go at, and we have looked at the biggest picture possible, and that picture stretches back to pretty much August of last year. I mean, United have played how many games they've played? I think it's 45 Premier League games they've played since the start of last season, and they've won 20 games, and they'll have lost 17. And that's
like
why
being an Everton fan, isn't it?
Well,
watching Everton.
At least they've got cups to show for it, United, and that's still the remarkable thing about them. There are other clubs who have had a better time of it in the league, and they've had a better time of it in recent years. But you look at the trophy cabinet and it's bare. And United, because they're United, they still find a way somehow or other in certain competitions to have another year etched onto the honours board.
It's that winning culture, isn't it? It gets you over the line in the big competitions. Nobody expected them to win the FA Cup in May. And what a special afternoon that was. When you talk about that Fenerbahce game, it feels ominous. Jose Mourinho in charge, Sofian Amrabat in midfield, and Fred in the double pivot. That gives you nightmares, doesn't it? It's like the three horsemen of the apocalypse coming in. I think if Ten Hag doesn't go during the international break, Samuel, I think we've discussed the possibility of Ruud van Nistelrooy coming in caretaker charge, or maybe on an interim basis. And I actually think that increases the chance of him getting that role, obviously, because if they do sack Ten Hag in the next week and a half, obviously we're recording this episode on Friday, then theoretically Thomas Tuchel would be available, or another manager might be available, and they could bring him straight in. That would change if it's obviously during the season. You might have to give it to Van Nistelrooy on an interim basis. Do you think still, we've discussed him at length, I guess, but do you still think it kind of feels a strong likelihood that Van Nistelrooy could take the reins at some point, considering that if they don't make this change during the break, they'll be playing games and within the thick of the action?
On a caretaker basis, that is certainly foreseeable. I don't think they can go down the interim route of having someone in charge for the rest of the season. I think that would be they need to be distancing themselves from the Woodward era and the Richard Arnold era, and unfortunately they're making decisions that are reminiscent of those two tenures, more so Woodward's than Arnold's. And the interim experiments often fail, and that one certainly did with Ralph Rangnick. And it's not like there aren't managers out there who are attainable. I think United fans will have breathed a collective sigh of relief at Gareth Southgate saying that he's not going to manage for a year, because there's no way United supporters would have had that. They would not have tolerated Southgate as manager. It would have been a ludicrous decision had Ineos gone down that route.
Fan base is always divided on it, but that would have really brought everyone together, because it was unanimous, that verdict on Southgate.
Yeah, I mean, at the risk of making an in-joke, I'd probably rather had Gareth Jones in charge rather than Gareth Southgate. But that could not happen. As laudable as his work was with England, he is completely ill-suited to becoming the manager of Manchester United. As I've said to you before, there are 3 men in the history of human civilization who have managed United to the title. Gareth Southgate would not be the 4th. Erik ten Hag will not be the 4th. You have got to hire someone you have belief in is going to make United champions again. And it could be short term or it could be long term, but you've got to look at them and you think that there is an end goal there, that United can become champions. And that applies to signings as well. The problem I have with this United squad is I look at it and I don't see many players in there who I have belief in are going to make or could make United champions in, let's face it, a couple of years to come, because they're certain to go at least 13 years without winning the title, never mind the 12 years that it will be come the end of this season. And so you look at that squad and you are judging it a couple of years down the line anyway. And there are a lot of players there who have been at the club for a reasonable amount of time already. And even someone like Bruno Fernandes, who's been a brilliant player for United over nearly 5 years, he's never come close to winning the title. And he has had a pretty decent support cast at times. It's never been perfect, of course. But even someone like him, you don't necessarily look at him and think he's going to be good enough to win, to be in a Manchester United title-winning team. And that's why I thought it was...
I think he is. And I think the narrative this season, I think I made it on the last podcast with you. Ty, sorry. His form's been awful, hasn't it, this season? He's been really poor and disappointing. Yes. But I mean, 6 months ago, we were praising him to the high heavens and seeing how outstanding he was, world class. And I mean, he still is that player. Everyone's allowed a drop of form, obviously. And I guess the frustrating thing is he's signed a new contract, and it's not the best optics, is it, when you sign a new deal, you get rewarded with a pay rise and your form drops off the cliff.
And that's what happened when he signed a new contract in April 2022. I think it was. His output in that running was dire, but then in his first season under Ten Hag, he was excellent. And last season he was excellent. He was easily one of the top 5 performers, probably top 3. I'd have still had Garnacho down as player of the year just because of his age and the responsibility he shouldered and
how he started the season.
He was the players' player of the year, wasn't he?
Joking. Your opinion, yeah.
Oh my. No. Look, I'm objective, as everyone knows from my player ratings and my pieces. There's no favoritism from me. But if we're talking about Wan-Bissaka or Dalot, then yeah, I'd have to hold my hands up that there is favoritism towards Dalot there. But Fernandes has been at United for nearly 5 years, and he has had an impact. He's had a pretty profound impact at times, but it's never taken them anywhere near close to winning the title. And he's 30 now, and I know that doesn't necessarily mean he's on the downward spiral, but he's got to arrest his form sooner rather than later. But he's not. There are some supporters who think he's a big problem. I'm still not entirely convinced by that. I see the argument that maybe United would be a more fluid and functional side with a set style if he was taken out of the team. But there have been times where they've played very well with Fernandes in the team. But I look at the 2 strikers, and I think they made a massive cock up, investing more than £100 million on those 2. Massive cock up, because neither of them, are good enough as a starting striker. And that is a huge problem in a team that struggle for goals and have a -3 goal difference and haven't scored in 4 of their past 5 Premier League matches. And Southampton, the only team who've scored fewer goals than them this season. You look at centre back. I mean, is De Ligt the most dynamic or senior centre back there in terms of his star power, his background, his CV? Probably is, and he has been in gradual decline for 5 years. Martinez has been a good sign for United, but he's gone off the ball recently. Maguire has been at the club for a while and has done a pretty commendable job over the past year, but is he going to make United title-winning side? No. Johnny Evans is 36 and doing brilliantly just to be playing as well as he is for United. Victor Lindelof is the great survivor, and it looks like he's going to get a reasonable quota of games again this season with the situation with Noussair Mazraoui and the 2 left-backs still being crocs. The midfield is going to need freshening up next year. Of course, we can't judge Ugarte completely now, but he's not looked up to it since he came in, and United probably should have known better, or should certainly, they'll have known bringing someone in who's just played at a Copa America and signing him so late that it was going to be being thrown in at the deep end. But he's looked in need of armbands so far when he has played for United, and he was completely unused in their 2 biggest games of the season so far last week. So that's another issue. The wingers, Rashford blows hot and cold season after season. Garnacho, you totally believe in. Going back to the midfielders, I totally believe in Kobbie Mainoo, but Anthony, you don't believe in. Ahmad, potentially in years to come, but not now. He's still got a way to go. Luke Shaw's been there for over a decade. They need a left back next year, and when I say they need a left back, I'm not talking about someone to compete with Luke Shaw, but someone to replace him. The only other one I think that I look at and I think he could be a title-winning goalkeeper is Onana. And I know he's made a lot of mistakes at United, but he does seem to be a bit more settled now. And in recent weeks, he kept the scoreline down against Tottenham, and he kept them in the game against Porto. That save he made at 3-2 was crucial. So I think he has made some progressive strides in recent months, but it would help if he had a pretty stable defence in front of him, and he's not had that so far.
So what you just said in the space of 2.5 minutes is like the famous David Moyes quote that United tweeted in 2013. Was it passing, creating chances and defending or something like that? That went absolutely viral, didn't it, back in the day? I think it's a good point about Onana, and yet I still think he's got another level to go up, actually. When you think that he was signed to have kind of transformational effect on build-up player and how good he is with his feet. You remember back to that Champions League final, Samuel, between Inter Milan and Manchester City, and how unbelievable Onana was with his passing. We've not really seen that, have we? In some of his distributions, it's actually been quite questionable, I think. And I think the way United play, it's not brought the best out of him in that regard. So I still think he's got another level to go up, and he's made hugely positive strides this season. We praised him when he made that double save at Crystal Palace. You probably made the point, which was fair, that the first save he kind of palmed it into. I can't remember who it was. Was it Nketiah?
I think it was Sarr, wasn't it? Ismaila Sarr.
Yeah, it was Nketiah with a shot and Sarr with the follow up. But I mean, the follow up, the rebound save was world class, wasn't it?
World class, yeah.
Yeah, it generally was. We'll leave it there for part 1, and we'll be back in a moment for part 2. Welcome back to part 2 of the Manchester is Red podcast. Now, this is probably going to be the most fun part because international break chat, it's always the best part. Garnacho, Mainoo and Mazraoui were withdrawn from their respective nations, Samuel, their squads. And as you just mentioned, Mazraoui has had a minor operation, hasn't he? Had some heart palpitations, I believe. Do you want to flesh that out? Because as I've been off the last few days, I've been in bed with a cold. I'm doing surprisingly well. I sound quite cheery, don't I, on this podcast?
Indeed. Fortunately for Mazraoui, United say it's not an emergency situation or particularly alarming, but he experienced heart palpitations and was taken off at half-time against Aston Villa. From what United say, it's a relatively common condition. I remember, I don't know if he had heart palpitations, but there was that time that Victor Lindelof went down quite alarmingly all of a sudden against Norwich City a few years ago, and I think it was described as an episode at the time, and he was given the all clear quite quickly after that. The fact that Mazraoui, United say they hope he will be back within a few weeks is positive as well, although United's time frame with injuries, illnesses can be a little bit sketchy at times, and maybe it's just kind of like the fair thing to not even set a time frame on when he will be back. But United wanted to clarify that yesterday, because apparently there was a bit of speculation on social media, one of those rabbit holes that I never venture near. So that's there has been some clarity on Mazraoui's situation, but it does mean that certainly regarding the Brentford game and probably the next two games after that against Fenerbahce and West Ham, there's a good chance that United will only have one senior fullback available again, which will be Diogo Dalot, which logically you would think that Lindelof will come into the team at right back, which, as I said earlier, in terms of him being the great survivor who always gets a reasonable quota of games, I think this is his opportunity coming up. And in fairness to him, I thought he performed quite respectably against Villa in invidious circumstances, coming on at half time with two enforced changes to the back four, and him playing out of position. He did pretty well, all being told. So he's probably going to start against Brentford next week, having started against Brentford at home last season at left back. So it just goes to show you that a year apart, there were still real problems for United at full back, primarily with the two left backs being Crocs, and that's why they've got to absolutely sign a left back next year. It's got to be high up the list on incomings, and it's got to be a starting left back as well. It doesn't. You can't just give Luke Shaw another pass. I mean, as I said, he's been at United for 10 years. He'll be turning 30 next year. Tyrone Marshall is not a young player either. He's 25, and come next summer, he'll only have a year left on his contract. So United are going to have to be pretty ruthless in that position. But I don't even think it's ruthless necessarily. It's just a position that needs strengthening.
It's going to be challenging for Malacia because he's had such a long period on the sidelines, and I think I've seen some fans suggesting he could go straight back into the team, and that's just laughable, to be fair, when you've had such a long time out of the game with such a serious injury. Whether he's actually up to the level required anymore, I don't think he will be, unfortunately. Whether he was at that level originally, he had a good spell, didn't he?
He had a honeymoon period when he came into the team for Ten Hag's first win against Liverpool, and he was excellent on that. That was his full debut, I think. And then he started over a period, but then there were signs that he was starting to wobble. I remember Bukayo Saka had quite a good time against him when Arsenal came up to Old Trafford.
Who did he get brought off against at half-time in Europe?
It was just about to say, it was a few weeks later when the season resumed after the internationals that Phil Foden ran riot against him, and City were 4-0 up at 4-0 up at half-time in the derby, and Malacia was hooked at half-time after Foden. I think Foden might have got, I don't know if it was possibly a first half hat-trick or he'd got a couple of goals that half. And of course, that was reminiscent of Patrice Evra, another left-back, getting substituted at half-time at Manchester City on his debut all the way back in January 2006. And after that, I think even a few days later, he started against Omonia Nicosia, but he was taken off at half-time with Jadon Sancho because United were 1-0 down. And from then on, it was just Luke Shaw back in the team and playing very well and having a good season for United. And Malacia, I think he maybe had. There was one more game, maybe against Aston Villa when they won 1-0 towards the end of the season. Quite a gritty win where he stood out, but I can't remember too many other occasions where watching Malacia that season after that purple patch at the start where he necessarily stood out. He was an economical signing, but it was, I think it said it all, that it was Lyon that he was due to go to until United hijacked that move and decided to make him back up to Luke Shaw because Ten Hag had quite correctly decided that Alex Telles was not up to it at United.
Yeah, I feel really sorry for him. He's had a really tough time of things. That first surgery didn't go to plan, and when you've had 2 rounds of knee surgery and he has not played since, I think it was June last year when he played for the Netherlands in the Nations League. So
I mean, I thought this. I just checking it towards the end of that first season, because Malacia, I think it was Rich Fay who said that Malacia was might have been the only players in every squad that season. It was something like that. But the FA Cup semi-final, when they had some injury issues in defence, you had Dalot at left back, Wan-Bissaka at right back, and Lindelof and Shaw at centre back.
Lindelof had a purple patch.
He did. He was very good during that period. But that's an example where Shaw was terrific at centre back during that run, but Ten Hag preferred to have Dalot at left back and Wan-Bissaka at right back. Wan-Bissaka was playing very well as well during that time, but Malacia, who was a specialist left back, wasn't getting really much for looking at that time. Just looking at it now, he started 3 of the last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I think 3 of the last 13 games there of that season. And that's when United had quite a few defensive injury issues. So his first season was classic 6 out of 10. First season did okay at times, but he was a bit part player and probably started more. I think he even said he started more games than he expected, but it wasn't a successful season. And unfortunately for him, he's not played in a very long time. It's been 16, 17 months, and he's nearing the road. He's there. He can, the light is quite bright at the end of the tunnel now, and it shouldn't be too long until he does get a run out. But I think it's probably advisable that he plays a couple of games for the under-21s before he does cross the white line in a first team game.
Yeah, he should be back before Christmas, and he will get a fantastic reception from Old Trafford when he does return. So that would be nice to see. Let's focus on Lindelof and Dalot a bit then, Samuel. I think it's quite interesting because Lindelof came on at right back, didn't he, last weekend? Am I right in saying that? Yeah, so Dalot was at left back. I've been banging my head against the wall this season because Dalot has been playing on the left side. There was obviously merit in doing that to begin with, playing Mazraoui on the right. But I think it became clear within just a few weeks that Dalot was really struggling on the left. He looked like a shadow of his former self, struggling to get forward, be effective. He looked like a different player from the one that we saw last season. So I made the case after the Southampton game when he conceded that penalty against Tyler Diblin to move him back on the right. But he's continued to be played on the left. So it's going to be interesting now to see whether Ten Hag plays Lindelof at left back and moves Dalot back to his natural position on the right, because Lindelof played at left back last season, didn't he? More often than he's played on the right anyways. I know it sounds a bit boring, actually. I said, let's talk about it. But I think it's actually a good point to make.
It's not a topic that sets the pulses racing.
Wait until you hear what I'm going to talk about next.
Oh God! Well, maybe I'll skip this part quite quickly. I think the problem is that come Brentford next week, it will be Dalot and Lindelof as the fullbacks. And a year ago on Monday, I believe it was Brentford at home, and the fullbacks were Dalot and Lindelof. And maybe that will be the cue for Dalot to switch to right back, because Lindelof did have that spell at left back last season. It wasn't remotely successful. I remember when speaking to someone at United in August, and we were discussing Lindelof's situation because he was injured and he clearly wasn't going to go anywhere. And he was talking about, he can play at right back. He played at left back as well, didn't he, last season? I said, yeah. And I left a pause and I just said, it didn't go well. And then there was laughter. They saw the funny side of it. But I was thinking Brentford at home. I was thinking City at home as well. I think he played at left back in that game, and look, he's not a left back. He's a centre back, and he's had some very good spells at centre back as well. But this is going to be his last season at United. He's only at the club because he got injured during pre-season, didn't recover, and therefore he was unsellable. So they won't be obtaining a fee for him unless they somehow managed to sell him in January. But I don't think there are going to be any clubs that are prepared to part with money or think it's urgent that they part with a couple of million for Victor Lindelof.
We'll move on to the next subject then. I'm sure you're looking forward to this one because you've probably not checked the podcast notes. But
I like the element of surprise of just whether I'm going to get caught off guard. It's good preparation, I suppose.
Well, it's make Manchester United great again. United have built a wall at Carrington, haven't they, Samuel? A big white wall.
Yeah.
You didn't know where I was going with that. Ten Hag's been coming into training with a red hat, make United great again, and an orange tan. Do you want to expand on that? Because I think you did the line this morning. I was at open training
Well,
a week and a half ago.
Yes.
Well,
yeah.
you messaged me yesterday, and I was like, it's painfully obvious now looking back on the photos. But for anyone who doesn't know, the players have obviously switched sides on the training ground because of the construction work, so they weren't training in the usual spot. So that was my first time across on that side, and I was just concentrating on training, getting some good footage, looking at what was going on. And I didn't spot the big white wall that was ahead of me.
Yes, well, as you said, where they train now, it's a different area to where they usually train with the main building under construction. So they're getting changed in what is the academy building. Normally, that expanded that addition that was completed last year, I think it was. So they're getting ready there, and then there's a pitch right in front of them. So they're training on that pitch. The other side of the wall are the women's training pitches. So that wall does separate the men's team and the women's team. There were some suggestions that the women's training sessions were a distraction, but United have unsurprisingly denied that, and they've said that this wall has been erected because, especially given the weather in the Europa League this season, they've got at least 8 Sunday Premier League matches before February, and of course that means they'll be training at Carrington on Saturdays, quite a few Saturdays. And Saturdays at Carrington are particularly busy because there are a lot of junior games that take place there as well, from under 13s to under 18s, and the public are allowed in because, of course, you've got parents, you've got relatives of young players who want to come in and see their son play for Manchester United, and they're allowed to do that. But Ten Hag wants a bit more privacy to prepare for matches in that environment, and obviously they were going to be. We've seen before during these training sessions that United will be using drones because they're working on tactical shapes and formations. So it's just essentially to have a bit more privacy to keep prying eyes out from passing on any sensitive information. I don't think Marcelo Bielsa will be sending one of his spies around there anytime soon. I mean, I don't think you need to really watching United these days. It's not. They're not the most challenging of teams to come up against, unfortunately. Maybe they will be again sometime soon, but in terms of tactical intel, they seem to have been pretty easy to work out again.
It made me laugh reading some of the replies to my tweets at the last open training session. And some people saying, is this all they do? Is it just rondos? That's a disgrace. I'm like, every team does rondos, lads. Calm down. It's just a very...
And also during the open bit, we're actually lucky at times if they do ball work in front of us. I've been to open training sessions where you're just seeing 20 odd guys running around a pitch and doing some shuttle runs and doing some exercises because they want to give us as little as possible. It's actually a bit of a treat to watch them do the keep ball sessions. And then, of course, after the 15 minutes are up, they will segue into small-sided games, tactical drills. It will be a lot more detailed because that's what they do, and also they don't want to do it in front of the press because it is sensitive information. I mean, it was interesting ahead of the Europa League final a few years ago. We were allowed to watch the session in full, and there was nothing we were watching that was in correlation to what United did the next day, like in terms of the lineups they used for their training match. I think they had a training session the following morning as well, where they probably perfected, and it was a lot more match specific, tailored for the game they were playing that evening, rather than the session that we were privy to the night before.
Yeah, it's always fascinating to watch training and get that close to the players in that environment. We obviously speak to them in the mix zone, etc. But seeing them actually in action is brilliant. They were doing a small-sided game at the end of open training recently. Anthony scored, and I couldn't believe my eyes. I couldn't help but notice as well in the rondos, Van Nistelrooy was incredibly popular for the players. He seems really, really liked. And he still got it as well. Some brilliant touches. He's still very, very sharp.
I really like Van Nistelrooy. I always think when a coach is getting involved in training sessions, I always think you're on a slippery slope there. Yeah. I mean, David Moyes used to do it, and I thought, no. It's almost as if you're trying to become one of the boys, when I always think there should be a little bit of distance there. But that's just my personal outlook on it. It's nothing controversial at all, but I think it's good to take a step back. But you look at Van Nistelrooy, and I think he looks better in a United attire now than he did as a player, possibly.
He's very personable as well. He was chatting on with journalists, had a bit of a joke with Simon Stone, so he seems like a nice guy. The last bit of colour.
Well, Stoney's. I think Stoney during the Zoom era, he's got a framed Netherlands shirt on his wall, and I said to him, "Oh, is that a signed shirt from Denny Lanzat or someone like that?" And he said, "No, it was Van Nistelrooy from a Dutch camp before the World Cup." He did an interview with him, and he was grateful and sorted that out. So yeah,
I think Van Nistelrooy said something like, "You're still here" or something like that. He was joking.
Yes,
and Simon Stone, he was like, "Yeah, I'm still here."
He is.
The last bit of colour, Samuel, worth mentioning was Harry Amas driving into training, listening to Valerie by Amy Winehouse.
It's not Amy. Let's see. This is where you're showing your age here. We said this at Villa Park last week.
The remake.
We were saying, like, he's saying it's Amy Winehouse. It's not. It's the Zootons, and the Zootons version is better as well.
If you ask Harry Amas who sings that song,
he was
good money. He would say Amy
but
Winehouse.
he is actually quite a bit younger than you as well.
Well, I'm closer to Harry Amas's age, I think, than you.
Yeah, I think I'm more than twice his age. So yeah, that's aged me a little bit more today.
We didn't know who it was when we were driving in. I thought it was going to be a senior player. And we asked a member of United staff, like, "Who is that?" And he went, "Oh, I'm not saying." And finally gets out the car with his hood up, but it was Harry Amas. It was just a joke when he said that. Some good stuff. Right, Samuel, we'll leave it there. Thanks as usual for your time.
Yeah, thank you very much, Stephen. Appreciate it.
Thanks always to the listeners. Have a great weekend. We'll be back on Monday. Take care.